It's natural in racing games to want to know how fast you are, how you stack up against other players, and many games make this pretty easy to find out through things like skill-based matchmaking and ranking systems. But Forza Horizon 5 doesn't have these, and in some ways leads you to believe that you're better than you might actually be. Take for example the Drivatar difficulty levels, like highly skilled and unbeatable. Obviously, unbeatable Drivatars are in fact beatable, but it's designed to give you that sense of pride that you overcame a seemingly impossible task. This isn't inherently a bad thing. The game wants to make you feel like you're good, because that's a nice feeling, and in many ways Horizon is by nature not designed to be competitive. And that's okay, games are meant to be enjoyed however you make that enjoyment, and it's not a bad thing for a game like this to pad your ego a bit and take a more relaxed approach. However, like I said, it's a racing game, which by nature is competitive, so for the majority of Horizon 5 players, the easiest way to see how you stack up has been to compete in Rivals, time trials with a global leaderboard and percentage rank for where you place. Ever since the early days of Horizon, this has been one of the most accepted ways to gauge your skill level and gain bragging rights. But I'm here today to tell you that you might not be as fast as you think, Horizon as a whole has a major skill issue, and in fact my dog can beat the majority of players. Let's dive in. Right now, I want you to think of the Rivals percentage a player would need to achieve to be considered a good Horizon player. Maybe top 50%? That's above average, so would imply that they're an above average player, right? Or perhaps you're thinking top 10%. Surely it's an accomplishment to be considered among the top 10% of players. Now, I'd actually bet that many of you said for a player to be considered good, they need to be in the top 1%. It's the best percentage you can get, and something so prestigious, one of the most notorious clubs in the game is named after it. Well, if you gave any of those percentages, you're wrong. Let's dissect the leaderboards themselves. These boards contain every player's best attempt at the track, but not every player has given every track their best attempt, or even really tried at all. So how do we filter those out? It starts, of course, with invalid times. These can be, as a whole, generally just removed from consideration, and this alone often cuts out well over 50% of the board. Here at S1 class HMC, the first clean lap sits at around 1 million out of 5.8 million, meaning that roughly 80% of the times on this board are essentially meaningless. And from there, we can make some more educated guesses to remove things like unusually slow but still clean times, and times set in cars with a PI well below the maximum. Sometimes these overlap, and also overlap with hacked times. It depends on the board, but these can often account for another 10 or more % of the total, and can be removed because, like with invalidated times, these generally are not genuine attempts at setting a fast time on the board. Finally, you can account for hacked times near the top. This is a far smaller issue than it used to be, and on many leaderboards now is a statistically insignificant percentage, but a good way to gauge this is to look at the top and find the first legitimate time by knowing just who the best players actually are. Sometimes the top 10 will be full of legit players, and on other boards, the first legitimate time can be well over 100 places down. Hacked times can account for another few % of the total. So if we filter all of this out of HMC in S1 class, we can say with a good level of confidence that over 90% of these times are not legitimate attempts at the board. So it might seem like being within the top 8% of a huge leaderboard with over 5 million players is an accomplishment, but in this case, it just isn't. I can confidently say that any player with any car near the top of the class could get within the top 8% of this board without any effort. And we'll actually come back to prove that, but I do want to touch on monthly rivals, because these leaderboards don't have nearly as many issues as the permanent ones. Invalid times only account for a tiny percentage of the board, usually less than 1%, and that's because you need to set a clean time to get credit for the playlist, and people do these to get credit for the playlist. On top of this, everyone's in the same car, so people aren't bringing in underpowered builds, and hacked times are a much smaller issue. So maybe these are a better gauge of skill than a super popular permanent board? Well, yes and no. All the above things are true and do help, but many, if not most, valid times here are still phoned in. Players are just trying to complete the content and move on, so they often only set one lap, not even a flying lap at that, and that means the majority of these times are not representative of a player's true skill level. Okay, so what about the less popular permanent boards, on a less popular track, or even heading into DLC boards which are much smaller? Many people won't be doing these by accident, and cheaters don't bother with them so much, so the people who set times here are likely trying to set a good time. Well, this is where my dog comes in. See, my dog is actually a top 1% Rivals player, and I can prove it. If I just turn on some dog-friendly assists, sit her here in my skill-boosting gaming chair, and strap the gas down, we can see how she does at Reservoirio Sprint in A-Class. In a non-meta car, this is just a heavy all-wheel drive RS6 that I built back when the game first released. And oh, there she goes, finishing with a strong time. Let's see what she's at on the leaderboard. Top 1%! And she can do this over and over and over again. In fact, if you have a dog, or even just a pet rock, give them a decent car, turn on all the same assists, lock down the gas pedal, and watch them set a great time. As you can see, Evie here got multiple 1% times across many leaderboards. A top 2% time at HMC S1 class in a GT1, and she was even top 10% on the monthly Rivals. Who knew dogs could be such good Forza players? So, okay, with that bit aside, what's the point here? Well, to start, don't trust the Rivals percentages at all. If you want to use Rivals to gauge skill level, join a club with active players or follow a lot of players who are good at the game and compare yourself to those times. Are you 0.5 seconds off the world record pace or 5 seconds off? I used to tell beginners to shoot for the top 10% first, then work their way down to the top 1%, where I had thought only decent above average players could get to. But turning on essentially auto driving and just pressing the gas with no further input can get to the top 10 or even top 1% of just about every single leaderboard. Now, you want people who need these assists to be able to play, and being slower than the computer isn't automatically a bad thing. After all, AI chess bots can beat some of the world's best players, and Sophie AI in GT7 is insanely fast on max difficulty. So we do need to establish how good the auto drive actually is. And even if you cut out all the times on a Rivals leaderboard that can easily be considered not legitimate attempts, auto drive still in most cases places well into the top half, especially if given a good car. For example, if we say 92% of the HMC board here is not valid, well, auto drive was still well within the top 2% of the total board, and most hacked times are towards the top, meaning auto drive was still roughly within the top third to top quarter of drivers. Now, this is still a rough estimate, and if we want to be real, even a lot of these legitimate times are still likely not times where a player really tried their best in a good car setup. So even though it looks here like the auto drive is a significantly better than average player, I would argue that given the right build and just a couple laps, a lot of these drivers could probably still beat the rubber band. But I think it's a real advantage to consider that the computer is consistent and clean in Rivals. It sets roughly its best lap right away and every time. And I do think the auto drive is still better than a not insignificant percentage of the player base. And this is where we get to Horizon's skill issue. As time has progressed, the skill gap in Horizon has widened significantly. Back in Horizon 1 and 2, the franchise was smaller and newer, and the gap between the slowest players and the fastest was a lot smaller. But as time has gone on and more games released, the franchise has grown and gained experience itself, and this means more entry-level, lower-skilled players are entering the series, and more people are becoming more skilled with more time. These days in Horizon 5, there is a massive skill gap between the top and bottom portions of the player base, and this makes it really hard to design a game that works for everyone. So what can Playground do to change that? Well, obviously you can't make the fast drivers slower, but you can make the slow drivers faster. Horizon doesn't do a really good job of encouraging players to improve, and to start, these padded leaderboards don't help. I think all invalid times just need to be removed. This is easy. If you don't set a clean time, why even let the time be on the board? I feel like this is there to pad player numbers, but it completely skews the results by doing so. Also, make sure times are only set by actually entering rivals and not by just doing a single player race. And I'd also love to see a warning pop up for bringing a car, say, 10 PI under the max. Still let people bring them, but I think a lot of beginners don't fully understand the class system, and the single player doesn't really teach it. So a little pop-up saying, hey, this might not be a good pick for this event because your PI is lower than the max, would be a quick and easy teachable moment. Finally, of course, removing hacked times is key, especially towards the top of the leaderboards. It's so sad to see real world records buried by dozens, if not hundreds, of hacked times. And even for those further back, some boards are still littered with hacked times well into the top few thousand, making a top 1000 time on the board actually probably closer to a top 100. These things alone would, I believe, return a lot of the prestige of setting a top 1% time, encouraging players to shoot for percentage goals again, and helping them better understand where they rank among Horizon players as a whole. But I do think Horizon needs to encourage players to build and drive better in general by taking some other actions as well, like improving AI difficulty, which it seems like they're doing for Motorsport, further rewarding clean driving, especially in online settings, by introducing a better penalty system and perhaps even safety ratings, again, like they're doing for Motorsport, and adding something, even just minor vanity items in-game that are locked behind a higher skill level, like we saw in Horizon 4's ranked mode. Pretty much everything in Horizon 5 can be achieved by a low-skill player, and in about the same amount of time as anyone else. So because there's no prestige, no ranking system, and so on, there's just no game mechanics pushing you to improve. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, Horizon is meant to be the more fun, casual racing experience, with Motorsport being on the other end of that spectrum. And I am fully okay with them catering to that, but I do believe that you can cater to a more competitive experience too, without sacrificing the casual experience. And giving players a stronger in-game motivation to improve can help both the casual and competitive sides of the community. I know the conversation has been beaten to death at this point, but adding a ranked online mode would make the unranked experience better by filtering it into players who are just there to have fun and do more casual races. Now, of course, a good ranked mode would involve a lot of other systems and improvements that we won't get into here, but the point stands that I believe good ranked online would improve both the casual and competitive experience. If you just build more systems into the game to encourage players to experiment more with builds and improve their driving and racecraft and put it all to the test, it's going to make them enjoy the game more because goals make games fun. There are lots of existing systems that could incorporate this. I think having a big Horizon story that sort of models the Gran Turismo license tests would be a great on-theme way to help improve driver skill. Make it hard to 3-star, and give players a vanity item like a badge or a gold racing suit or something for 3-starring everything. Nothing that actually matters for the game, but something that tells players, hey, this is hard to get, but if you practice and improve, you can reach your goal and feel proud about it. Now, I don't want to just turn this video into a big list of ideas, so I'll wrap up by saying Horizon is a great casual racing game sandbox, and it offers a lot to players, but it doesn't push players to get better, and in many ways quite intentionally obscures player skill differences and discourages serious competition. The competitive community is here to stay in Horizon, and I think that giving players better tools to understand and improve their own skill level and compete against others would be a major improvement for everyone that plays the series, even with Motorsport right around the corner. So, thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.